Started out as a Renaissance scholar,
Yes.
Renaissance literature, yes?
Yes.
And I can see you taking these technical things. Did you have yellow Post-its all around your apartment to learn?
Well, this book, I conceived of this book in 2017, and it's now 2024. And like, granted, you know, I gave it to Oxford almost a year ago, but it took me 6 years to write, because I like literally had to teach myself climate economics and the history of the international climate regime and all of this stuff. So, and each chapter is a very different piece of the puzzle. It's more like a kaleidoscope than a narrative that pulls through. So each chapter was like starting fresh. So it definitely took a long time, but I know this is gonna sound weird, but in some ways, I feel like what's happening now, discursively and culturally, is not entirely different from what happened in the Renaissance. So what happened in the Renaissance was you had a kind of medieval culture that went through this cataclysm of a fractured Christianity, which was a really, like a humongous political cataclysm at the time. And then all of this new knowledge got sort of imported into that conflict from, you know, the Italian bankers who rediscovered Plato and the Romans. And so there was a way in which they were, and then of course, colonialism began. They discovered the Americas, and there was that expansion of geographical ideas of nationhood. So everything was new. There was this massive transition going on, and very often they were using medieval ideas and the medieval language to try to work their way through these new problems that were coming out of new economic forms, new geographic discoveries, new geopolitical challenges. And there was a new language coming in, but they, you know, it was sort of overlaid. And it's really only kind of almost in the 18th century did things get resolved and you get a fully, almost like, it's like the secularization that began in the Renaissance, for example, only comes into fruition in the 18th century. And the kind of remnants of medieval thinking are sort of absorbed, superseded, sublated, etc. And there's a way in which that's kind of what's happening to us now. We're trying to transition out of the fossil fuel system, which is not just an energy system. It's a economy, it's a set of beliefs, it's an idea of what it means to be human, it's a kind of geopolitical complex, it's everything. And we're kind of still using the language of the fossil fuel economy, the ideas of the 20th century and 20th century economics to try to see our way into the next thing. And so many of these figures that I talk about, like Obama, or even like Nordhaus, like they believe that climate change is real. They know perhaps that it's dangerous, but they truly believe that the systems that we've had in place are what enable human flourishing and that what will help us get through this next thing. And they're not, right? They are the thing that justified the fossil fuel economy. They are what explain the fossil fuel economy. They need to be superseded by new discourse, new ideas, a new way of imagining the human relationship to our biosphere, to our politics, to each other, etc. So in a way, that's a very long-winded way of saying that actually being a Renaissance scholar is it's just a form of training that can be useful for now. I mean, it's like everyone here in this room has some training that can be useful for now, right? This is an everything problem, and so all these different ways of looking at the world can be brought to bear on how we transition away from fossil fuels and transform and recreate the world so that we can have a livable future. Yes?
Have you come across the research of this Silicon Valley group, Rethink X?
No.
They started doing all this research on technology in general over history and technologies that went through these radical transformations. And they argue, and I think they follow, I think, a lot of the similar things that you're talking about, but they argue that we're at a moment where there are 4 major radical transitions in technology that are taking place that they are very optimistic about, although they perhaps paint a picture of even more dire situation that we're in now in terms of the climate itself that's perhaps over the edge already. But they do paint a picture of a technological change which has that kind of historical connection that you're talking about. You might be interested in.
What are they called again?
Rethink X.
Rethink X. I will
Yeah.
check them out. Thank you. Yes.
I guess on that same vein of these different eras that have kind of historically been identified and are kind of associated with different periods of time and how all these things kind of culminate, how do you feel about the term the new industrial revolution? Because I partially am a speechwriter for the Department of Energy.
Yeah.
And this whole concept of industrial strategy, the new industrial policy, that's very much kind of the veins right now of what everyone is really pushing for.
Yeah.
And everything is about jobs. I had a conversation today that was like, I straight up asked, do we care about industrial decarbonization? And they told me not,
No.
not obviously, not in a subtle way, but like we care about jobs and that's it. So I'm just curious, like, do you think that's an appropriate term? Do you think there's a better
Well,
phrase?
I've never heard that term before, so I don't have a, well thought out take on it.
Yeah.
My initial reaction is that this is a really good example of what I was just talking about, how we're trying to take something that was really vital and sort of explanatory for the late 19th and early and mid 20th century and bring it into something that's happening now where it's not entirely appropriate, because it's not just that we have to like re-industrialize depopulated areas in the middle of this country. We have to re-industrialize them with a decarbonized system, or else we're just contributing more to the problem. So it's not, a new industrial revolution. I haven't thought about this messaging, so I don't want to just pull something out of my back pocket and have it sound silly. But my initial reaction to this phrase is that it's backward looking. It invokes the steam engine, it invokes smokestacks, it invokes all these things which we are really, we really need to supersede and transcend. So, I have questions, and I also have general questions about the intersection of the sort of political strategy of sending money to red states to build new industries in red states, in the hopes that then, historical climate deniers will be invested in the clean energy industry, but doing it in a kind of way that doesn't decarbonize from the beginning. Like, is it going to be decarbonized later? What about these people's identities? Do they really think that they're going to start voting for Democrats? Like, I don't, or is industrial clean energy just going to get coded as a right-wing thing? To me, I feel like we need to be thinking about the new and not reviving the old.
Yeah.
So that's my initial reaction to that.
One more maybe, and then I've heard of this third industrial revolution.
Oh, the third?
Yeah, this.
Industrial strategy is really big, like the plan for industrial strategy, and then the new industrial revolution. But this is also in the context of manufacturing more so, so it is a little more specific to that, but still that's like the dialogue.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think you alluded to it, and this also comes from Naomi Risky, that she talks about having, the only way that you're going to regulate emissions is to have carrots and sticks, legal carrots and sticks. And democracy, our democracy under Biden especially, was very good with the carrots. We gave out 480 billion, but we're not good with the sticks. And Biden let all these laws go through to expand pipelines and so on. So that is the major challenge. She talks about that in the video. So I just read now. I was talking to. So you was talking to? Yeah. Well, I emailed you last But in Washington State, Governor Nixon just came out with a new law, climate commitment. And I think, I haven't read it detail, of course, but this is what he's trying to get at, is some policies that can be enforced, to restrict emissions. And he's going to set a emissions cap for the state, and each, a bit like cap and trade here, but if they go above that, the ministerial factors above that, they'll be fined. And we've had here, but in New York State, I guess Reggie was someone.
Yeah.
But that is the problem, is how to regulate these industries that are pumping out, billions of gallons of juice manufacturing, oil and gas.
There were standards in Build Back Better, the initial law that was
Right.
proposed by the Democrats. There were pretty robust standards. There were sticks, but it was complicated because essentially Manchin was the deciding vote, and Manchin is a fossil fuel guy. So the only way that what got passed was by promising Manchin that for for every what is the word I'm looking for? For every solar farm on public land, they would offer a lease to the oil and gas industry. There was definitely a quid pro quo there, which was necessary to get anything passed in support of clean energy in the country.
The fossil fuel companies are not voluntarily going to cut that.
But the problem is that the fossil fuel companies are also holding our governments hostage, because they manipulate supply so as to raise the price of gasoline and cause supply side inflation when there are Democrats in office or when the Greens are in Brussels, and so that there's a political backlash and these people get voted out. So I guarantee that if Trump wins the election, inflation will ease, because much of this inflation it's complicated because some of the inflation I think is caused by the price of food and other goods that are being influenced by the climate crisis. But the point I'm trying to make is that these elected officials are in a very tough spot because they are being held hostage. They are being punished for passing climate policy by the fossil fuel industry. And so far, there isn't enough public commitment to climate policy to act as a kind of balance to that kind of blackmail that they get from industry. So if there was a more clear climate movement and the base of passionate support was larger and steadier, then I think there would be more of a counter force to this kind of industry manipulation of our political system through, restricted supply and other things that put politicians who are trying to pass climate policy in a very tough spot. So, this book is not addressed to the movable middle. This book is addressed to people who are concerned or alarmed about climate change, to try to get them to be very, very passionate and vocal and committed to taking political action from here until the day that they die. Because if you poll American voters, you see a very wide base of support for climate action. Everybody says they want America to hit net zero by 2050. But if you ask people, would they be willing to give up fossil fuels, that support among Democrats is very, very weak. And they don't actually see this as a life and death struggle between fossil fuel interests and the rest of us. So the more that I think this can be framed as a political struggle, not even a struggle, but sort of a life and death fight in some sense. And the more people really see the government as kind of something that they can demand work in their interests, which seems almost impossible to imagine, at the end of 40 years of neoliberalism. the more we'll have a chance to actually act as a counterforce to this kind of oil and gas blackmail.
Yeah, one question. To what extent, kind of led into this question, I think, to what extent do you think the current examples of climate change we're experiencing right now, the weather conditions that all across America people are feeling, will that lead to a change in the general population's feeling towards climate change, making it more, less of an abstract thing and making it more, very real to everyone across the country?
I mean, I think that, I think the research on this is mixed. And I think that how people understand extreme weather is very much influenced by their partisan commitments. And how the extreme weather is framed for them by the news media, which is part of the reason I founded End Climate Silence. Because repeatedly you will hear or read or see reports on extreme weather that will never mention the words climate change, let alone fossil fuels. So there's this way in which people understand that something is wrong and that they can see that the climate is changing, but they don't really know, which seems unbelievable at this late date, but they don't really know that what they're seeing is due to climate change that is supposedly still in a kind of safe range for Americans, and they don't understand that that is going to keep getting worse and more dangerous to them and their children that are there running around and driving to soccer and helping them with their homework and think that they're going to have some sort of future unless we stop using fossil fuels. So there's just the ignorance is so wide and so deep, and then plus the overlay of sort of partisan and identitarian commitments about how you're supposed to understand climate change and America and your feelings about the candidates. It's a very knotty problem, but some people have said that people don't respond to information because all reasoning is motivated, and I don't believe that. I think that you actually do need to inform people while at the same time you understand that they're going to be filtering what you tell them through what they already know and through who they think they are and through what they think is acceptable to know in their own social circle. But you still have to tell people stuff, and people still don't know. So yes, as extreme weather increases, yes, as we have 90-degree days in June, all of that stuff, people are sort of being woken up to it, but again, without the actual language to tie what they're experiencing to climate change, to fossil fuels, I don't know that it's going to have as much effect as you would imagine it should.
Thank you so much. We're going to have to end this part here because we just have a few announcements and a couple of catch-up updates.
Thank you so much for asking.